Do I look different? I had to turn off the evil overhead lights. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Crue Trime. Crue Trime, Crue Trime, Crue Trime, Crue Trime. My name is Sarah. Whoa. And what I do here is tell you a terrible story to ruin your day and put on my makeup at the same time. So if that sounds like fun to you, you're in the right place. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the bell notification, and then that way you will never miss one of my terrible stories. What's happening with my hands? We are this close to finishing our tour of the United States where I tell a terrible story from every state. And today's story takes us to the state with more than 130 active volcanoes. It has more coastline than the rest of the United States combined. It's the last frontier, friends. We're going north to Alaska. We're going to Alaska. And this is the story of Joshua Allen Wade. I just got home from work. I am tired. But I'm doing this for you. For us. Okay, one more thing. I don't talk about the makeup as I'm using it, but everything that I'm using will be linked down in the description box if it's still available for purchase. If it's not, I will recommend something similar. Just because I like you. Della Marie Brown was born on April 25th, 1967 to Daisy Pigeot. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's either Pigeot or Piggott. The birth was actually the result of a sexual assault, and Daisy was so traumatized by the assault, the pregnancy, the birth, the whole thing, that after Della was born, Daisy moved to New Mexico for a fresh start and sent the baby up to Anchorage, Alaska to live with her mother, Della. So Della was Inupiat, which is a group of indigenous Alaskan people. Their family actually came from a very small fishing village of like 500 people. It was called Shishmaref. I'm doing my best to pronounce these things, but you know, Google sets me up for failure. So Shishmaref is a fishing village that's about 120 miles north of Nome, Alaska. For context. Della was married to a man named Henry Brown, and he gave Della his last name. By all intents and purposes, Della and Henry were her parents, although technically her grandparents. Della's life was really hard. It was tough, She was sexually abused as a child by Henry. She later struggled with alcohol and substance abuse issues as well as depression. By age 33, Della was working as a bingo hostess and was living with her sometimes boyfriend named Rudy DePeace in Anchorage, Alaska. Anchorage is Alaska's largest city, by the way. The couple had an extremely volatile relationship. Most of their neighbors at the Idle Wheels mobile home court where they lived knew that Della frequently had bruises after their fights. On August 31st, 2000, Della waited until Rudy was asleep, and then she took his bank card and walked down to In-N-Out Liquor down the street on Arctic Avenue. Several witnesses would later account to seeing Della walking on her journey and said that she was kind of shaky on her feet, What we know from court records is that Della did make it to the liquor store. She bought a bottle of E&J brandy using Rudy's bank card, and that purchase is the last time that anyone saw Della alive. That same night, 19-year-old Joshua Wade and his friends were out for a drive in Anchorage in Joshua's father's red and white Cadillac. They had all been at a garage party, Some of them had been working on a car, and the rest of them were just drinking and getting high. Those garage parties. Well, as they were driving down Arctic Avenue, they saw a woman passed out in the street, and Josh said that he wanted to run her over.
What?
Such a nice young man. Well, his friends made him stop the car, and his friend, Dwayne Clevenger, got out of the car to drag the woman, who we now know is Della Brown, to the side of the road. Dwayne would later testify that Della was alive, but passed out, so he just grabbed her by her legs, and dragged her to the side. Beside the road was like a rundown shed that had been previously used as extra storage for the local TV station, but it was kind of abandoned and it was barely standing up, It was often used by, drug users, drug dealers, and sex workers. Well, Dwayne dragged her to the shed and then got back in the car and they drove off back to their little garage shindig. Later, each friend would say that Josh left the party many times that night, and then when he came back, he would be like kind of agitated, like worked up. On one of the instances that he came back, he had blood all over him, but it appeared that, he had just gotten into a fight, as he often did. I mean, okay, if you have not caught on yet, these are shitheads. This whole group. You know what I mean, like just always in trouble. Anyways, Josh washed up in the bathroom and then he told the fellas that he wanted to show them something. So they packed up and went back to the shed, and Josh showed them Della Brown's now dead body. The guys, once they saw this dead body in the shed, they ran away. They didn't want anything to do with that. Well, that night, Josh confessed to no less than 7 different people that he had killed this woman, and nobody did anything. Nobody said a word. It was 2 days later, September 2nd, 2000, when police officers found Della's body. She was lying on her back in the shed with her pants down around her ankles. She was clearly dead given the large amount of blood that was pooled around her head. She appeared to have been sexually assaulted and had her head had been bashed in with like a very heavy object, likely a rock. The medical examiner was later able to confirm that she had been assaulted. They had found semen in and around the area. You know what I'm saying? She also had cuts to her leg and throat, but it was certainly that head injury that killed her. The police collected what evidence they could from the shed, which mostly consisted of like trash, beer cans, cigarette butts, and even old diapers. They were never able to find any kind of weapon. But investigators started working on the case, and honestly, they didn't have a lot to go on. Each person that they questioned provided a DNA sample, including Rudy, the boyfriend. Rudy was not a match. So 2 weeks later, Timothy Beckett and Danny Troxel, 2 shitheads that were at the garage party, came to the Anchorage Police Department with a story. See, these 2 fine young individuals were in the car with Joshua Wade that night, and they knew. So the 2 shitheads told investigators that Josh told them that he had beaten the woman with a rock, and then he later threw that rock in the lake. He also confessed to raping her after she was dead.
Instantly, I was like, yeah, no.
They were able to describe what she was wearing and what state her body was in, and eventually Timothy added that the night after the murder, Josh had given him a ride. Before dropping off Tim's girlfriend, Josh had stopped at the shed, got a red shovel, and then tossed it into Tim's lap. After they dropped off the girlfriend, Josh tossed the shovel into some bushes by an apartment complex, and Tim said that he could lead investigators to it, but it would probably have his fingerprints on it. Well, let's not get too excited, because these are shitheads, and their stories changed often. Police never found this shovel, but they were able to convince these shitheads to wear a wire. The police also gave them an undercover vehicle to drive around that was also wired. So the 2 snitches, I'm just kidding. It's the right thing to do. The 2 shitheads went to Josh's house, well, his dad's house, and they told Josh that they were on the way to a pawn shop and asked if he wanted to go. As an excuse to get him into the car, right? The police had also coached them for talking points, put a newspaper in the car. The front page story in the paper included pictures of 6 Anchorage area women who had been killed in a 16-month period, including the most recent one, Della Brown. Timothy started talking about how the cops were onto them and how the 3 of them needed to get out of town as soon as they could get enough money together. Well, during this conversation, Josh was looking at the pictures of the women, and he right away picked out Della excitedly and pointed to her as the one that he had killed that night. Then he goes on to point out 2 more that he killed. Josh repeatedly said that he never raped anyone, but he talked about how adrenaline got him excited. He said if the police were smart, they'd find his condom wrapper. Okay, so there's some conflicting information here. So Josh either is totally like off the rails serial murderer, or he just brags a lot. Hard to tell. Either way, the police with that much information had enough to arrest, and on September 30th, Joshua Wade was arrested and charged for the murder of Della Brown, also sexual assault and evidence tampering. It took 2 years for that case to finally make it to trial, and Josh was in jail that whole time. When investigators were able to conduct a search on Josh's father's home, they ran into some issues with the search warrant and what it authorized, and long story short, not really any evidence, certainly nothing substantial to connect him to the murder of Della Brown was discovered. Really, the only thing that the prosecution had that they could rely on was the witnesses that said that Josh said what he said about murdering Della Brown, and, that he just really hated natives. His words, not mine. Also, these two shitheads, Timothy and Danny, had terrible records themselves and had been arrested probably about a month earlier for, robbery. And their testimony at the trial was provided in exchange for some pretty sweet deals for the trouble that they were in, and the jury was made aware of this. So basically, no evidence to connect him to this crime, and the only witnesses are not credible. So after 2.5 months of testimony in the trial and a week of deliberations, the jury found Josh not guilty on all counts except tampering with evidence.
At his sentencing, he had this to say about the case.
The only person I'm sorry to is her mother, that's it, and the family. But other than that, I'm not sorry for all the hell you guys had to go through, for lying and trying to get a conviction on me.
He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, but at that time, he had already served nearly half of that. In December of 2004, Joshua Wade was released and got back to his old tricks. So who was Joshua Wade? I'm glad you asked. Joshua Allen Wade was born on March 13th, 1980, to Catherine and Greg Bubba Wade, and they lived in Montana. At the time, they were devout Mormons, and they also had another daughter named Mandy. The Wades moved several times, and each time it was because Bubba had lost his job, typically as a security guard. Eventually, he became a bouncer, like a nightclub bouncer, and he was having multiple affairs, and they were no longer involved in the church. They later moved to Seattle, and Catherine was also no angel. She was carrying on affairs as well, and when Bubba would find out, he would get super violent. So, things at home weren't good. Josh and Mandy were witnessing multiple instances of domestic violence in the home between their parents. When Josh was 7, the parents officially divorced. Good. In 1991, Bubba moved to Anchorage, Alaska, where he found work as a deckhand and cook on a commercial fishing boat, leaving the family behind in Seattle. Catherine was struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, and at age 10, Joshua tried to end his own life. He spent 3 months in inpatient psychiatric care, and after he was discharged, he had no follow-on care, no therapy, nada. The only thing that he retained from his time in the hospital was how to make a bed with hospital corners. Remember that. In 1993, Catherine sent 13-year-old Josh to live with his dad in Alaska. By this time, Josh is like an out-of-control juvenile delinquent who had even gone after his sister Mandy with a knife. At any rate, Josh was certainly an extremely angry kid. He abused drugs and was hospitalized for psychiatric episodes on multiple occasions. He was into criminal activity as well. Within 2 months of his 16th birthday, he was caught in a stolen car, possession of cocaine, and a 9mm handgun. He was very troubled, and he was a shithead. So the murder of Della Brown occurred when Joshua was 19 years old. He went to trial, he was acquitted, and then he was out of prison by age 24. On August 7th, 2007, a nurse in Fairbanks, Alaska, called the Anchorage Police Department to report that her friend, Mindy Schloss, was missing. So every other week, 52-year-old psychiatric nurse practitioner Mindy Schloss would travel from where she lived in Anchorage to Fairbanks for work. So she was supposed to come to Fairbanks that week, but she never showed up, which was just totally out of character. Mindy Lauren Schloss was born on July 16th, 1955 in Brooklyn, New York. to Walter and May Schloss. She grew up in Syracuse with her family and brother William. She began her career in nursing at the University of Alaska, but over the years, she decided that she wanted to be able to provide more, do more, give more. She became a nurse practitioner and then a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And Mindy was described by everyone who knew her as incredibly kind and giving. For a long time, she and her best friend and nursing school classmate, Jerry, would travel to remote villages in Alaska to provide health care to people in need. She went to Fairbanks, as I mentioned, every other week, and Jerry would watch her house and feed her cat, Willie. So when the police showed up to Mindy's house, Jerry was there to help them kind of do a more thorough walkabout because she was familiar with everything. One of the main things they found that just really freaked her out was Mindy's bed, or how neat it was. Mindy was a restless sleeper, and she never made the bed. And she definitely didn't make the bed with tight hospital corners like the way it was made up that day. So when the Anchorage Police Department began to look into Mindy's disappearance, they talked to all of her friends, her coworkers, and they canvassed her neighborhood. They figured out pretty early on that Mindy didn't just, leave. Something bad happened. It was just very alarming that her house had not been disturbed, and it didn't look like anything had been taken. So as a nurse practitioner, Mindy had, a fair amount of medications in her house and a prescription pad, and the prescription pad wasn't taken. The only thing in the house that was gone was her suitcase that she normally used to take to Fairbanks. Ooh, also, she normally always took a taxi to the airport and left her car in the garage, but her car was gone. So that's weird. Well, none of the neighbors had seen anything, but they all pointed to one house on the block as the problem house, Mindy's next door neighbor. They said that there was 2 or 3 young men who lived there, and they regularly had loud parties that were just disturbing, bothersome. So the lead detective on the case, Pam Pernew, had gotten access to Mindy's bank records and saw that there was a $500 ATM withdrawal from a local Wells Fargo bank at 5:01 in the morning on August 5th. 2 days before she's reported missing. Once they reviewed that footage, the security footage, they found a young man wearing a bandana covering most of his face, taking that money out. So during that transaction, the guy actually pulled down the bandana so that you could see his face from the nose down, and Pam reached out to the FBI for assistance in tracking the withdrawal. They pretty quickly found another withdrawal. This time it was the next day at just after 4 in the morning at a different bank. Young man wearing a bandana takes $500 out of Mindy's account 4 miles from her house. So while they're watching the footage of the second withdrawal, they notice that the guy takes the money, leaves the ATM, then he comes back, then he leaves, then he comes back. He's weirdly pacing. Turns out that the guy, when he took the money out, forgot to take the card, and then the card got sucked back into the machine for safety reasons, which normally wouldn't be a big deal because you just go to the bank the next day, tell them what happened, they give you back your card, but it's not his card. And he already knew her bank balance because he checked it. There was $20,000 in there. He's probably just gonna little by little pinch off the top, I guess, but now he doesn't have the card. On August 9th, 2 days after Mindy's been reported missing, a person familiar with the case spotted Mindy's car. So the car had been parked in the Sky Chef's parking lot. That's the company that provides meals to airplanes, right? So that parking lot was a mile from Mindy's house. And there was security footage of that parking lot. So when they reviewed it, they noticed a young man exit Mindy's car after parking it, and then used his shirt to wipe off the door handle before walking away. When they searched the vehicle, they found a lot. It's real specific, right? They found her purse in the back seat. Inside were her wallet and keys. In the trunk of the car, they found that Fairbanks suitcase. Clothes were all rumpled up, and there was a garden shovel taken from Mindy's house. Also in the back seat, on the passenger side floor mat, they found blood. There was also a dusty shoe print in the back, indicating that somebody had been lying down on the back seat. They took swabs from the steering wheel and the gear shift to test for DNA, and they took fingerprints from her car as well. At this time, the FBI's evidence response team had already been to Mindy's house to collect whatever evidence they could, and they collected thousands of hairs from her living room carpet. for example. So Detective Pam went back to Mindy's neighborhood to re-interview neighbors and talk to some that they'd missed the time before. And Pam talked to Kokie Cosmetics in the house directly across the street from Mindy's house. And Detective Pam felt like the woman was kind of holding back. The very next day, Kokie called Pam and told her that she wanted to talk, but not at her house. One of the guys from the problem house had asked her to not tell police that he lived there. He was on probation and he didn't need any trouble. Kokie said he didn't threaten her exactly, but she felt intimidated by him and the way he approached her, and it scared her. That neighbor was Joshua Wade. Well, immediately when Pam recognized that name, like anyone else working in law enforcement in that area, they knew his name because, he'd been acquitted of a brutal murder. He'd essentially gotten away with it, in their opinion. Investigators ended up using canines to track scents that they had collected from Mindy's vehicle. On August 17th, a team of 5 specially trained dogs and their handlers arrived from California. The first dog started at the first ATM location, was given a scent from the evidence bag that they had collected from inside the car, and then he walked 3 blocks to Mindy's house. He went to her door and sniffed around, and then he went right next door to Joshua Wade's house and sat down. So Detective Pam wanted to see the dogs in action herself, so she went to the second location, the Sky Chef parking lot at the airport, and they started at her vehicle, or where it was, and the dog starts going off with the handler. They end up going like 3.5 miles all around the city, making turns on the streets here and there, and then finally ends the search at Joshua Wade's house. You guys, dogs, we don't deserve them.
All right, Safi, let us know how this is. You gotta be a good food critic, okay? How is it? Be honest, how is it?
Disgusting.
So the police were able to obtain a search warrant. So they searched this home that Josh lived in. They found a jacket that matched what they had seen the guy from the ATM video wearing. And in the pocket of the jacket was the receipt from the ATM withdrawal. I mean, come on. You steal somebody's ATM card and then you keep the receipt. Ooh, those are long. They also found a woman's wristwatch that was later identified as Mindy's. They were also able to match DNA evidence that they found in the car to DNA that they already had for Joshua Wade. But where was he? When police interviewed the other shitheads that lived in the problem house with Joshua Wade, they said that he didn't have a car and he mostly just got around on a bicycle. Presumably, it'd be pretty easy to find him, but he was definitely on the run. Police released the photo of the ATM guy, Joshua Wade, to the local news, and they put pictures everywhere. Long story short, Joshua Wade was apprehended 2 weeks later after a desperate attempt to flee. Josh had been in and out of jail so often over the years that, he knew the system and he definitely had a chip on his shoulder, especially after beating that murder rap. Well, the police knew this and they had to be very careful. They decided to see if they could bluff, get him off balance. So they told him that he had been arrested for 2 counts of bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and access device fraud. Access device fraud? Well, they explained it's because he used Mindy's debit card without her permission. Well, at that point, Josh kind of smirks at the police and says, "You guys trying to play games with me?" Then he asked for his attorney. So obviously the police had not spoken to Mindy, so they couldn't prove if Josh had permission to use her ATM card. Without a body, there was no murder. She was just gone. Well, that little legal strategy didn't hold up for very long because on September 13th, 2007, Mindy's body was discovered in the woods. She had been shot once in the back of the head and her body had been partially burned. By the time she had been discovered, her body was badly decomposed, so it was kind of difficult to find out if anything else had occurred, like an assault. Well, they had found all this DNA evidence in her car, in her home, and it matched Josh, but it was all sort of circumstantial. But now that they had a body, there was a murder. On May 18th, 2008, Josh was finally charged for her murder. So while he was in jail awaiting trial, Josh reconnected with an old girlfriend named Lisa, and they were talking a lot. Fun fact, just months before, Lisa had called the police to ID Josh as the ATM guy. I mean, these hoes ain't loyal. Well, the police zeroed in on her and pretty quickly got her to work with them, and she revealed all the conversations that they had, including the confessions that he had made to her regarding what had happened with his neighbor, Mindy. Josh said that he broke into her house late at night to steal money and other valuables, but Mindy woke up and confronted him, caught him in the act. So he tied her up with zip ties and then put her in the car. Then he went back into the house and tidied up to make it look undisturbed before he got in the car and drove off into the night. Tidied up. Made the bed. Well, he drove for about an hour, taking her into the woods just south of Wasilla. He scared her into giving him her ATM pin, so that he could rob her, essentially. And then he took her out into the woods, and he said that he was going to cut the zip ties free so that she could escape, but it would give him a head start. But what he did instead was shoot her in the back of the head and then light her on fire. The case against Josh with Mindy Schloss was much stronger than the one with Della Brown. And this time, Joshua Wade was facing the death penalty, so he took a plea deal. The plea agreement required him to confess to killing both Mindy and Della. He received state and federal sentences, and the state issued the maximum sentence of 99 years in prison, with a minimum of 66 years to be served before he could be eligible for parole. On the federal level, he was sentenced to life with no parole. So, if he happens to finish those 66 years, he still owes the feds life. He ain't getting out. At both of his sentencings, he read something that he wrote that sort of apologized, but he also tossed in that the prosecution was just trying to pin things on him that he didn't do. He was remanded to Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward, Alaska. Because there were so many threats on his life, Josh had to be held in solitary confinement, which he hated. Oh, poor Josh. He actually reached out to the feds to cut a deal that if he confessed to additional crimes, could he move to a federal prison in the lower 48? Well, he agreed to confess to 3 more murders, and he was sent to federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana.
When the state came to us in the Department of Law and said, would you be willing to, talk to the federal authorities about taking him, my answer was, who cares? He's never going to get out of jail. I don't care where he serves it.
But since Josh had been such a shithead when he was in Alaska, he had so many write-ups for misbehaving and acting out with corrections officers that when he got to Terre Haute, they put him directly in protective custody. So careful what you wish for, I guess. The murders that he confessed to. So he said that when he was 14 years old, he killed 38-year-old schizophrenic John Michael Martin, who was a regular visitor of a local Village Inn restaurant. He had been found shot to death on a bike trail in Anchorage in 1994. Then in December 1999, he said that he killed Henry Ongtorosuk. That I am not saying that properly. Henry also suffered from mental illness, and he had just started living in a local motel, which is where he was found shot to death. These 2 men had absolutely no connection to Joshua, and although he confessed, he didn't provide any details that weren't already known to the public. He also said that the night that he killed Della Brown, Della was actually with another man, and Joshua claims that he fought with the man, stuffed him in the trunk of his car, then later took him out into the woods and assaulted him further, and then ended up shooting him. This body has never been found. Joshua did not know the person's name, so does he exist? We don't know. Remember what I said about he liked to make up stories and brag and take credit for things? Some people say that he only confessed to these murders, A, to get what he wanted, which he didn't really, and B, because all during the trial, he was called a coward for killing women, and he wanted to be big and bad, I guess. So this story is kind of difficult because I feel like Joshua Wade was only convicted because he finally killed a professional white lady. He had already killed an indigenous Alaskan person and got away with it. He had also committed many, many, many crimes and had gotten in little to no trouble for it, so
That's my opinion!
it's annoying, but I suppose it all caught up with him anyways. And that is the story of Joshua Allen Wade. Again, if you're interested to know any of the makeup that I used in today's video, just look down in the description box because everything is linked for you. If you want to recommend a Crue Trime story for me, there's also a document down there that you can complete and leave all the details. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing to this channel before you leave today. I upload new videos here on YouTube every week, and you can follow me on most of the other socials as well. That is it for now. I will catch you next time in the next video. Bye! Ongtowasruk. Giving him her. Murray! They were never able with a body on Murray! Fucking, how do you say this? I'm butchering that. I feel like I've done this same makeup look a million times.